So I'm joined on the line by Sam Lee from The Athletic, who has been a semi-regular voice on OTB throughout the season. Sam has been providing updates on Man City's transfers over the last few years and last few months as well, but he had a really interesting thread on Twitter about the job of a journalist during the transfer market and how difficult it's becoming in the current climate. Sam, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, no problem at all. No problem. Thanks for the invite.
So first question then, when is Jack Grealish signing for Man City?
Yeah. Well, I was glad to see when I woke up this morning that there's other updates from journalists that I know well and trust on that. So I feel like I'm not a lone voice anymore, but I feel like somebody else can take the burden. It's certainly an interesting race. The Villa fans, as like you can imagine, don't seem to want to let him go, but that's kind of manifested itself in some kind of weird online behavior, which kind of led to that thread you were talking about yesterday.
Yeah, and of course that is all your fault. It's your fault that Jack Grealish is signing for Man City from Aston Villa. But I guess for anyone who hasn't read the thread, can you give a brief synopsis of your thoughts and what led you to write it, I suppose?
Yeah, well, I will try to be brief, but I think I didn't realize there was a maximum capacity for Twitter threads, but it wouldn't let me add any more. So It was obviously a long thread. I was worried it was probably long and rambly, but it was just a collection of thoughts really on what it's like covering transfers as a journalist, but probably with a particular focus on just kind of how draining and like, unpleasant it is, and how much, I don't know, like ideally you wouldn't have to do it. And I kind of acknowledged throughout the thread that look, it's my job, and I don't mind having to rise to that challenge of getting transfer updates and knowing what's going on. But kind of the demand for it is wild, because like you can do something on a Monday and then by Tuesday people want updates again. And then I think probably the bit that's maybe most relevant to that is if you then do get an update and you, like, for example, I went to the City friendly match last night, and you speak to more people there, and you get more context then about the move. So you do technically have an update, but you just think every time you share it, you're just inviting more abuse, really. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've had journalists on in the past who have covered maybe Man City, and it's the Man City fans who have been handing out abuse, whether it's been FFP stuff or something. And obviously now with transfers, it's Villa fans, but it's just football fans in general. Like, it doesn't really matter the club. But it's just that constant demand. I suppose the other part of the thread is the fact that you do provide those updates, and then like with Grealish, on the one hand, you've got Villa fans saying it's just not true whatsoever. But on the other hand, you've got some Man City fans who kind of think it's more than it is, and they want you to say it's done. And I'm not saying this is all the Man City fans, but the problem is there's so many replies saying just announce it or whatever. It's like, I know you kind of, I don't know if it's a joke or it's just a kind of getting carried away, but it's like, I can't announce it if it's not done. Like,
yeah,
you can't put that pressure on people to do it. And then I suppose there's another kicker of the Twitter aggregator accounts that can't help but take things out of context because it's just their nature. If there's a Man City or a Man United or a Liverpool news account that says, this journalist is saying this, if you just boil that down to like 20 words in a tweet, you're just never going to get the full context. And sometimes they make mistakes as well, and they end up putting stuff because there's less good ones. The Man City ones are generally quite good. There's one which is just rogue, and you just think, how have you thought I've said that? And then you start getting abused then for things you've not said in the first place, which is the worst of both worlds. It's that situation, really. I wasn't looking for sympathy. It wasn't fishing for people going, oh no, we think you're really good, really. I just thought it was just one of those days when I felt it's probably a good time to give a different perspective on it. And look, white male journalist, I'm one of the last people that would say, oh, you need to feel sorry for me. I've got it pretty sweet. It's a good job. I'm not really complaining about it, but I just thought I'd shine a light on this little element. And I suppose that was triggered really by seeing that I was actually trending, and people were sending it me going, oh, fair play, you're trending. I was like, that's not good though, is it? I was like, these people aren't saying what a fantastic article. It wasn't good to be trending, but yeah, that's kind of a little insight into just how it feels to be demanded on to put forward so many updates so regularly.
Yeah, the aggregator sites are quite interesting because we sort of got a taster of it last night when we had Andy Mitten on, talking about Man
right.
United, and he gave an update on Paul Pogba's contract situation. And one of the I suppose from a broadcaster's perspective, it's quite frustrating because, you know, the Andy Mitten tweet that we sent out got a little bit of interaction, a little bit of reaction, but then this aggregator took it and it got like multiplied. But I guess to be the journalist involved in that, I mean, that tweet had, you know, over 1,000 retweets. It had over 4,000 likes and like thousands of comments as well. And Andy Mitten is tagged in every single one of them. So you can only imagine what that's like, waking up with that being your phone, that being your Twitter, with over 1,000, maybe 2,000, 3,000 mentions or, you know, replies to a tweet that you're mentioning. So it's absolutely crazy what these aggregator sites, because obviously they're a collection of all the fans that want that exact update as well.
Yeah, and again, it's like it's not that they're doing stuff maliciously. Like I said, it's just like the definition of the job they're doing is, you know, they're doing that job. But then again, because I like to come on these things and kind of give extra context and stuff and talk around things and why situations are like that, and I do that on podcasts and stuff, and in Q&As and stuff. And I like that kind of feel of a little community where you can. It's kind of contained within that. So there's like, I've got a podcast on The Athletic, which obviously I need to do that more and more because they're kind of my listeners. But there's another podcast I do for City fans, which is like a small subscriber base. I wouldn't say small; it's probably got a couple of thousand. But I always like doing those podcasts because I feel like what I say there stays there. Because as soon as you say something, it gets boiled down to that one tweet. And yeah, like you say, I hadn't thought of this until yesterday when a colleague mentioned it. But why do we have to be tagged in it? Like, just say who we are. Like, we don't have to be tagged. I don't want to see all this. Like, there's quite a few times when I know I've done a story in the morning and I know it's going to get aggregated, so I'll just delete the Twitter app for the day because it's just like it's just too much. And that's part of it. That's part of, you know, kind of just protecting yourself from the comments, really. And, you know, yesterday it wasn't like, it's not like a mental health thing. Like, I'm all right. Like, but it's just like, can you be asked? Like, it's just so much. And again, like, it's part of the job. You put yourself out there with the information, and you know, there might be people skeptical watching or listening, and they do say, you know, well, you've got to be right, or, you know, you can't be covering up for mistakes by claiming mental health or whatever. And that's not the case. You know, and mistakes are one thing, but, you know, you work really hard to minimize those. But it's just the fact that, yeah, sometimes you get an abuse for stuff you've not even read. Not even read, sorry. But sometimes you get abuse for it's like the amount of Villa fans yesterday saying, "Oh, what about this? What about this?" It's like you don't really know how it works. Like, there's just a million little things about journalism, let alone actual transfer news, that people don't really know. And I've always tried to explain that. I've been doing this job for 6 years. I've always tried to explain the way media works and football stories and stuff. Like, you'll always get City fans saying, "Oh, it must be the week of a big game." Like, there's a negative story that, "Oh, we must have a big game coming up." It's like, these articles are not there to kind of disrupt the dressing room. And even if they were, the dressing room would not be bothered. Like, do you know the kind of stuff that goes on within football dressing rooms that we never hear about that would be far more disruptive? You know, people getting arrested that never makes the papers kind of stuff. That will be far more disruptive than somebody saying, I don't know, Raheem Sterling's not going to sign a new contract or something. Like, or even, you know, a comment piece on FFP. Like, just things like that. Like, it, and yeah, when it comes to transfers, like the logic of the Villa fans is that, oh, we've got really rich owners and they're really ambitious. I was like, are they as ambitious and rich as Man City's owners? Like, it's just Grealish wants to move. Look, maybe there'll be some kind of U-turn at the end of the day, and this is the kind of thing as well. I feel like I need to stress so much what I'm actually trying to say. Like, for the City fans who think, you know, they might get carried away and think it's. I'm not saying it's done. Don't start photoshopping him into kits yet. I'm just saying this is the situation as it is now. But then the other end of the spectrum, you've got Villa fans going, it can't be this, can't be that, and then all these different arguments that are irrelevant. Like, one of them was, why? Because the article was actually about where he fits in at Man City, which I knew would be dangerous. I didn't particularly like the timing. I didn't want to do it so soon because I thought it's better to wait until, you know, you get to that stage of a transfer where, even if it's not officially done, the fact that everyone's talking about it, you know that it's there then, and then you can kind of capitalize on that and do it. And I knew there wasn't enough talk around it to maybe justify the classic, where would he fit in at Man City, because it's not quite over the line or close to being over the line yet. But the article was just about where he fits in. And one of the comments was, oh, like, there's been nothing but Twitter ITK stuff about this. Why are you talking about it? I was like, well, there have been loads of reports about it. And then they were like, well, go on, name them. So I just posted a link to one of these aggregators, actually. because they just rounded up that there was like a Friday during the Euros when I was off, but there was like reports in like all the main newspapers about Grealish going to Man City in different details, but that was the thrust on this one particular day. And there was the MEN as well. And, you know, if it's the MEN, then you would imagine there's some kind of club sanction to it, you know what I mean? And City wouldn't let them write that they're going to sign Grealish for however many million if it wasn't true.
Yeah.
Which is the kind of thing that people need to understand about the media and that kind of thing. So I posted that link, and then they were just like, oh, he's discredited his own argument. This is all talked about. This is all the mail. It's like, you said, I was like, you just said there was no proper legitimate links by journalists. I was like, these are the legitimate links by journalists. And I was like, and as much as anything, I'm telling you that it's like, it could happen. Like, this is the situation. But it was just, and then it was just, oh, we've got owners who want to do this, and he loves the club. And I know he loves the club, but he does want to go. So it's just how, and it's like, it's just a classic thing of don't shoot the messenger, really. But
yeah,
like, the amount of eyes on the messenger these days is a bit much. And look, I know it's not the hardest job in the world, and I'm not, like I say, I'm not looking for sympathy. And I know it kind of sounds like it when you're talking about these things, but it's just a different perspective needed, I think. Because if you're one of these people who are just going, oh, update, okay, that's one thing. That's draining enough, to be fair. But then I suppose beyond that, it becomes, you know, even if it's well-meaning and it's not abusive, it's kind of like, we know there's updates. You know, we've got editors. You know, we've got our own kind of professional pride. We want to provide these updates. We know we don't need the constant kind of reminders and the demand. And like I say, like I replied to my mate, and I've already deleted it because my mate tweeted this morning his own story that, you know, City are confident on Grealish and blah blah blah. And I replied to saying all the best, and that got like 20 odd replies straight away, and I was like, actually, this isn't good for him, so I deleted it. But a couple of people were replying saying, is this true? And I was like, or like, do you agree? And it's like, were you not around? Yes. I mean, maybe they weren't, but it's like, if that's one thing I always think, like, if you're so invested in this kind of transfer that you're going, oh, is this true? It's like, did you not see all the talk about it yesterday when I was doing it then? And it's like, what's the difference between yesterday and today? And to be fair, me and my mate, we've got details that differ, but ultimately it's the same end. You know, it's like City, there's a very good chance they'll sign Grealish, and that Grealish wants to join City. So it's just, yeah, I can understand it's kind of a confusing time and people want answers. And you know, but we try really hard to provide them. But it's just crazy. It's just crazy.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the whole, you know, everything's at the fingertips. And you know, if you want to watch a 3-hour movie of any sort that you've never seen before, you can get it up on your laptop within seconds. And I suppose that's where this sort of mindset comes, especially on social media. The sources and the trusted sources is an interesting one, because I have a lot of friends that to this day still won't trust a transfer story until Sky Sports announce it, until they see the yellow ticker come up, which is like, I mean, Sky sources are very rarely any different to most journalist sources.
Yeah.
In terms of actually getting a transfer story, maybe just to educate people on how they unfold for you. So how many sources within Man City would you need telling you a piece of information before you would trust that, you know, there's something legitimate here that's potentially going to happen, and then you can start being confident enough to write that, you know, say, for example, Grealish is potentially going to come to Man City?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. It doesn't necessarily have to be within Man City, but obviously you got people who might be external to Man City but know the situation. The idea of trust is really interesting. But to answer that question initially, I'd say there's one person who, even if I didn't have any other sources, and he said this is happening, that's good enough for me, because I know who he is, and I know who he knows, and I know the circles he's in, and the track record now going back 4 years is just phenomenal. So it's like you talk about the reliability and stuff, and people not believing it until it's on Sky or whatever. If that's what they choose to be reliable, then great. And I know for some people, they won't choose to believe something until I say it. Or my mate Jack was talking about, it works for the Mail. You know, these kind of reliability, and there's tiers on Reddit, which is difficult as well, man. It's like, who's deciding these tiers, and also it's like that then can turn into abuse. You know, if people like just want to discredit you, you just get called tier 5 or whatever, which is presumably the lowest one. and that's a slippery slope. But essentially, in terms of sources, you've then got, like, I'd have my own tiers, I suppose. It's not how I actually think about it, but for the purposes, because so at the top, I'd say I've got that one guy, but then you've got a load of others who just, friends of the players. But then it's not necessarily transfers, because you might have like a friend of the player who's great on what they feel and their contract and their injury and other players and what happened in the dressing room. But then they won't necessarily know about transfers until it's not too late. But, if Grealish signs in, let's say 2 weeks, that would be good, because it's like the players will probably have a good idea about, they're coming in this week kind of thing. But, we need to be speaking about Grealish 3 months ago, really.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one. But then you've got those kind of second tier ones, which are still very reliable, and agents who work in the game and stuff. But then obviously within that, you need to work for a certain amount of years to know who you can and can't trust. Because obviously a lot of times in football, agents, if they work for other industries, there'll just be a lot of opinion in it. You know what I mean? Like, there'll be, I can't see why they want to sign him. He doesn't fit. And it's like, well, that doesn't matter. Like, I don't necessarily, until I wrote that article and dug around, I didn't know Grealish would play as an attacking midfielder, central, like in the kind of Gundogan position for City. I'd assumed he'd play on the left. But then I thought Foden and Sterling are there. So to me, it didn't make sense. But it doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense, because it's what Guardiola wants and what City want. If it's happening, it's happening. So there's that within the agency and, just football world as well. I mean, how many? There's the usual standard in journalism is double sourced, isn't it? You get 2 sources on it, and that's normally achievable. It helps. There's so many other things as well that I in particular get sent. It can add up to 3 or 4, and it might not be the full details, but it might be something that adds confidence to that. So what I did yesterday, when the Villa fans were kind of haranguing me a bit, and they were saying, "Oh, we'll go on," because all I'd said was, because I wanted it to be an analysis piece, but I wanted to kind of justify why I was writing it. Like, it's not out of the blue. It's like the move is advanced in terms of it. From everything I hear, it looks like he's going to sign for City. So I said that, and people were like, "Go on then, why are you saying that?" And I was like, "Okay, well, I don't have to answer to anyone really, but I'm going to." So I kind of outlined the kind of sources that I'd heard it from, which kind of, that top tier fella, and another guy who works in the game and around it. And they told me at the start of July. And then there was last week, it was a very kind of ITK sounding rumor, like the kind of thing, like, so-and-so's, they're looking for houses, or, I saw his wife in the car garage or whatever. She said, you know what I mean? Stuff that just think that crops up all the time and it's never true. Somebody got in touch about some kind of preparations they're doing at Man City. And I was like, okay, I didn't know the guy. So conversely, about the other player City are trying to sign, Kane, somebody I do know told me another thing similar about, Kane and Manchester and whatever. So it's like, I can trust that more because I know him. But this guy on Grealish, I didn't know him, but he seemed very genuine. He kind of proved to me who he was, and what he was saying about where he was true. So that's interesting. And then dug around a bit more. And as far as I could make out then, that was then true about City's preparations at the Etihad for bringing in Grealish. And I was like, well, that just then strengthens... I can't use that detail in particular because it would give away the kind of source of it, really, the ultimate source where it came from. But I was like, that adds confidence to the first 2 sources anyway. And I messaged another guy who I'd know who works with... He doesn't work with somebody. He's very good mates with somebody who works in like one of the high-up teams at City. And he was sending messages around to people, and he got one back, and it was about like security arrangements or something. And I was like, that is not enough on its own by any stretch to do a story on it. But coming back, added to the other stuff, just kind of helps add the confidence to it. So it's like, how does it go about happening? You do need the very solid sources at the start, but then normally, and it's normally after you write a story, you then get people chipping in with extra stuff you've heard. And then so I went to the City game last night and was speaking to people, and I spoke to 2 other journalists and somebody else. And it was just, again, this isn't necessarily, it doesn't affect anything that's out there that's already done, because this was after I'd done it. But for my own confidence of how it's going, it's like there's there's more evidence there that what I've said is right. And then obviously the next time it comes to it, you then go back to the people who gave you the info initially, and it's just digging around for the details. But even that. So I know this is kind of long and rambly, but it's for me, it's quite a long process, and it's something you always want them to be right. Like I said before, you do make mistakes, but like the mad thing is, and part of that thread is people. So you've got your mates who don't believe something until it's on Sky Sports, but there'll be some people who don't believe what I say now because Dani Alves didn't sign for Man City, and obviously I was like, well, Man City are going to sign Dani Alves. He's due in Manchester for that, and he was, and then he changed his mind, which everyone knows, which is on the record. I think Dani Alves himself has talked about it enough times. He just decided he was going to go to PSG. Alexis Sanchez. And like for me, I know that was.
This might answer your question.
Alexa, stop. Sorry, it happens all the time. So I won't call him by his first name anymore. But Sanchez, from my point of view, I know that was right all summer, and all the situation was that he wasn't going to sign a new contract for Arsenal. He wasn't going to go to Chelsea. He wasn't going to go to PSG. And this was all the stuff in the media. But I was fortunate enough to know, and I know this sounds very arrogant, but it's just true because of that ultimate source I was telling you about. And there was other sources on that as well who were very good. That City wanted Sanchez that summer in 2017, and Sanchez wanted to move to City. And again, that's all on the record. And in the end, he signed the contract because he was with Chile, and they were going to kick off when the transfer window closed. So he signed the contract. But City left it right until the last minute to kind of have that leverage over Arsenal, but until Arsenal realised that he wasn't going to stay. So they tried to push it, but then Arsenal couldn't get the replacement in. And the issue was it just kind of fell through late in the day. But then, so people still say Sanchez, Dani Alves, Messi last summer because, ultimately he was going to go to City, but he just couldn't get out of his contract. And people still say, oh, well, you got this wrong. It's like, I didn't get those ones wrong. But what I will say, and what I did say in the thread is I've written before, that same summer, 2017, I think, the Pepe Reina was being lined up for City. Just completely wrong. Like it was just lazy. It had come from, I can't really go into it too much, but it was just lazy. I just didn't check it out properly. There was Bruno Fernandes, and City I kept asking City because he was on the front pages of the Portuguese sports newspapers every day. Every day he's going to go to City. He's going to go to City. And I was just speaking to City, the official comms department, because I couldn't get any comments from anyone else. And in fact, there was somebody I did really trust, and I said, "Do you know what's going on with Bruno?" And he goes, "No, they don't want Bruno Fernandes." He goes, "They want a partnership, like a Sporting Link partnership for youth players with Sporting Lisbon, but they don't want Bruno Fernandes." And I was like, right. But then there was other people who were kind of who were low down that tier system. So I know there's people who were kind of around Man City and stuff, but I don't really believe them. But they were kind of saying it, and it was on the front of the papers every day. And I was ringing City, and I was like, "Look, can you just give us an idea? Is it true?" Because City, if they've been linked with players every day and it's not true, they'll ring the journalist and say, "Forget it." So I was like, "What?" But the season hadn't finished, so they were like, "Look, we'll talk after the season's finished." I was like, "Right." And then, so I know somebody in Portugal who's like really well connected. So I asked him. I think I asked him twice. I went into him first time. He was like, "I'm not sure." Second time, I was like, "Look, there's just so much noise about it. Can you try and find out?" And he rang me back. It was a Sunday. I remember I was away for the week with my wife, and he rang me back and he had loads of information. He was like, "These are the players. These are the conversations that have been had between this guy and this guy. These are the players that could be involved going the other way. This is the fee." And I was like, that sounds good enough for me. So I did it. And then, like, I don't know, 2 days later, City had done that brief for the reporters who I was telling about, which I was looking for before. And they said, "We're not trying to sign Bruno Fernandes." And they sent it to me. They were like, you can knock down the Bruno Fernandes stuff. I was like, that's my stuff. I was like, that's my stuff. So I just had to split-second decision because I knew it was going to be tweeted. I just had to put my hands up and say, "Look, they're not signing Bruno Fernandes this summer." Like, I got the info wrong. And it was because I think I was so swept up in all the news stories in Portugal and the sources that I shouldn't have believed. I overlooked the people I should have. And obviously when I then went to the guy in Portugal who I felt I could trust, but he was probably speaking to the same agents that were spinning the yarns for the newspapers, and he maybe got took in by it as well. Yeah. But again, that was 3 years ago. And then just another one was Johnny Evans. So it was the winter that they signed Laporte. I think City were because they were trying to sign Johnny Evans. I think Evans signed a contract on the same day as Sanchez in the summer. because he was with Northern Ireland. But in the end, Mangala couldn't go, so they didn't have the squad space. They didn't sign him. And I think City were quite happy in that January to be like, oh yeah, Johnny Evans is still an option kind of thing. But they went and signed Laporte. So at some point I was like, oh, Johnny Evans is an option. But obviously he wasn't. Or maybe he was, but Laporte, it was still wrong because the main thing, I was chasing the wrong ball, really. They were after Laporte. And I was able to confirm that they wanted to Laporte when the news came out in Spain. Because I messaged this main guy, and I was like, I really hope this isn't the case, but are they signing Laporte after the U-turn that he did 2 summers before? And he was like, yeah, bollocks. So I do get stuff wrong, but people never say Johnny Evans. People never say Pepe Reina. And so, but they're the ones that are wrong. They're the ones that didn't really have any truth in them. They're the ones where I made mistakes in the process. The other ones I talked about, Sanchez and Dani Alves, and stuff, it was all right. There was no prediction. There was no, this is done. This is the contract signed. It's going to happen. It was the situation as of today, and then it didn't happen in the end. So, I think between those practical examples, you'll probably get an idea of the sourcing that needs to go into it, and how you who you discuss these things with, and who you trust as well. Because, like I say, the lower you get down that list of people, because there's people around City who have had good stuff in the past, but you don't fully trust them. But then when they start saying things, you think, yeah, okay. But like I say, I've learned my lessons then. So last summer because even if I don't know the players initially, I'll be quite good on the positions they want. And I'll know for a fact, if they're being linked with a defensive midfielder and I'll know they don't want a defensive midfielder, then I can just forget it. So last summer, they didn't want an attacking midfielder. They didn't want another midfielder of any kind to replace David Silva. They were like, we're fine with what we got. But there was a load of reports about Houssem Aouar at Lyon. But it was all kind of ITK stuff, and there was stuff on the Man City, the main Man City forum. And there were people, they were like, it's my information, not me, but the people on the forum were like, it's my information that City are going to sign this guy this summer. I think people were replying saying, Sam says and Jack says and Martin says that, City don't want to sign midfield. And they were kind of saying like, well, they haven't got the information that I've got. So then you do start kind of thinking, this guy's very insistent. And then there's like these American guys who do podcasts for City who I've done with them. And I woke up one morning and they were like, it's our information. And they've got no skin in the game with breaking transfer news. They don't have to do it. It's not their job. It's not expected of them. But they woke up one day, I woke up one day and saw the tweet and they were like, it's our information. Our is going to sign for City this summer. And I was like, where are they getting this from? But I was thinking there must be something in it. There must be something in it because these guys, they don't have to say this. And there must be a route to it somewhere. But ultimately I was like, well, I know City aren't looking to sign these players. I've been told forcefully enough times they're not looking to sign him. They're not looking to sign any midfielder. And there was stuff about Douglas Luiz coming back as well, which falls under the whole midfielder bracket. So I just ignored it. And I even thought, I was like, look, I know people in France. I know journalists in France. I could maybe go and speak to them. But I was like, but if they come back, and I think there was like a picture of Aouar on like a private plane at some point. And I was like, that again, that's prime kind of internet frenzy stuff. But I was like, if I go to people in France and they come back and say, oh, yeah, City like him. I was like, I'm not sure if I can even believe that anyway. And after the Portugal Farrago, really, with Bruno Fernandes, I don't even want to ask those questions because I'm happy with the sources that I trust saying it's not going to happen. So I'm just going to leave it. But all summer it was, what's going on with Aouar? Are we going to sign him? Why aren't you talking about Aouar? Well, I've seen this online. I've seen this on the forums. I was like, it's just not true. So yeah, you've got to really know what to trust and what you can't. And obviously, a few years ago, made a couple of mistakes with it, but now we've got a much better idea. Which again is much more frustrating when you got Villa fans saying, "What you talk about? This can't be true." And it's like the simple fact for me, the simple fact that Manchester City have not denied anything about Grealish this summer is for me. It's not enough to write a story. But it's enough for me. I'm telling you that this is the burden of proof for me. That's it. Man City have not denied a single thing about Jack Grealish this summer. And do you think I don't know if you'd have an answer or an idea, but do you think Man City would let the British press talk about City spending 100 million on a player if they weren't going to? Wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen. They would have denied it. At least with Kane the other day, with that story on the front of the Sun when it's 160 million, what did City come out and say? We're not paying that kind of money. They didn't say they didn't want Kane. They said we're not paying that kind of money. It's about the kind of fees and stuff.
Okay.
But they don't deny the interest in the players. And for me, that's enough. Again, that's not why I've written the stories, but that's just another layer of certainty. And again, I'm not saying it's happening, but that's as sure a sign as any in the industry. I was speaking to another journalist last night, and I was like, look, me and you know that that's enough, isn't it? But obviously, if you say that to a Villa fan, City haven't denied it, they'd laugh you out of town because it's not enough on its own. But I know that kind of sure fact on its own that City would not allow themselves to be linked with a player of that magnitude for that kind of money that they're not going to sign. And people go, and even City fans go, oh yeah, but they might be doing it for a smokescreen and they might try and sign someone else because, some City fans don't want them to sign Kane. So I've seen it suggested, oh, maybe it's a smokescreen and they're really trying to sign Haaland. It's like, they're not. And that's when you need the other sources. You can't just rely on what City are doing because you also need the other sources to guarantee that there's no other targets. They just want Kane. This is how it works. So there's so many different things that go into it like that. There's there's other ways and there's other routes I could go down, but I appreciate we're on to half an hour now. So
I think people just don't
as you want, and if there's no more, then fine.
People just don't they don't really appreciate the layers of I suppose trust and responsibility that you have as a journalist, that this is your job, that you can't just write what you see off one person's word that they saw him in an airport and that's not enough. One thing that I do want to ask you before we finish up, if you look at your Twitter or look at Fabrizio Romano's Twitter, or I'll use Fabrizio as the example because I guess he's one of the main guys that people go to on Twitter. He could have a story about a midfielder from Marseille signing for Bayer Leverkusen, say for example, and underneath that there are hundreds and thousands of replies saying Sancho news, Varane news, completely irrelevant to what he's supposed to be talking about there. And a lot of them are Twitter accounts with photos of, say, Paul Pogba as their main account, and a lot of these fan accounts that you're like, are these even real people? Because they seem to be, the logic behind their responses just doesn't seem to be a human being. But how much of the transfer window has become this sport? Because there's international fans now that may not have been to games, and I'm not dissing international fans that they can't attend games because sometimes it's just too expensive. But has transfers in the transfer market become almost the sport in itself in some circles?
Yeah, I'll say transfer news is probably bigger than most in terms of what's read the most. I'd say transfer stuff is probably up there with the biggest events in football. Obviously, when you've got the Super League stuff and stuff like that, information is what people want, basically. So if you've got a big expose on how a manager got sacked or something, then that will be very well read or subscribed to in our case. But it's obviously the most common ones of those are transfers. And there's just a huge kind of frenzy around it. And look, I'm not saying we're the innocent journalists in all this, because look, sometimes, I'm not saying we play up to that because all the info has to be legit. But obviously sometimes it's like you'll do a transfer roundup because people, but then because there's the market for it. Do you know what I mean? But I suppose if I had my way, if I'm being completely honest, I wouldn't do an update until there was really something to say. It's like somebody walking in the first innings of a cricket match and saying who's winning. It's like, well, what do you mean? It's just starting. The other team haven't batted yet. They're about 5 overs in. There is no winner yet. We don't, there's no point giving an update at that stage. But it's huge. Yeah, the off the field stuff is kind of sometimes bigger than what happens on the pitch. And we'll see that. We think it's bad now. Because they've gone back to having the transfer window still open when the season starts. And it could be Man City because City haven't got much of a pre-season. They've got players coming back late. The young players, they have the academy closed. So it's been a disrupted pre-season. And look, maybe Grealish will sign before, maybe he won't. Maybe Kane will sign before, probably he won't. But if they have a slow start to the season because they've got Spurs, Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, whatever, Leicester in the first 7 games, if they have a slow start to the season, the window's open, and they haven't signed players yet, you think the frenzy's bad now. And Arsenal fans as well. I know Arsenal fans are famously OTT, but to be fair, everybody is really. But if any of those big clubs in particular have a bad start to the season and they've not been perceived, look, if United have a slow start, they've got Sancho and Varane, so it won't be fever pitch. But say Arsenal don't really sign anyone and they have a terrible start, you wouldn't want to be an Arsenal journalist because there's so much pressure then, because there's pressure on the club to sign the players. But then, you know, the kind of, like I say, the football Twitter guys with pictures of footballers and no idea how old they are or where they're based or whatever, the most mad guys, they're putting that pressure on the club. But they're also, it's almost like it's our burden that we need to go out and find players for Man City and bring them news. And it's like, well, it's just the messenger thing again. So yeah. It's a proper frenzy, and the transfer stuff is probably bigger than like most matches and most other types of content relating to football.
So just before we finish up then, so this gets picked up by an aggregate site and blows up and does loads of views. Out of 10, how likely do you think the Grealish transfer is going to be?
I'm not doing that. Because I don't want to, because I'm genuinely not, because I've been so, and I'm always so careful as well not to, because if I said 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10, then you'll have City fans then thinking, oh, it must be, he's ready to sign. And it's like, look, I'm comfortable with what I've said. It's an advanced stage. He wants to come. City believe he's going to come. It's all there. It's all ready. But you never know what's going to happen. So, and again, there's this sort of difference. So I wrote all that a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, look, there's talk about him signing a new contract, but you know, it's at this stage, and this is what's going on with City. But then as soon as I used the word advanced yesterday, that goes on the aggregators, and that's when it blows up. And you got Villa fans going, what's advanced about it? Blah, blah, blah. Whereas I gave more info 2 weeks ago, and it wasn't quite as loud. So then if I go from this is the info to advanced to saying to you 9 out of 10, that'd be bad news. So I don't know. I'll just say what I've said already. Like it's in a good place. If he doesn't sign, he doesn't sign. Then he's changed his mind and he stays with his boyhood club. But as of the weekend, at least, and as I suppose even last night, that's, you know, City weren't expecting any problems with that. And, you know, as soon as City find out that he's backed out, if he has, you know, like if in this hypothetical example that he's backed out, they'll start distancing themselves from it pretty quickly.
Okay.
But at the moment, yeah, it's all kind of heading in one direction. But I'm not going to put a number on it.
I'll put the headline. Sam Lee says 8 out of 10 Grealish is going to sign for Man City. And
yeah, that'll go well. It'll do well for views. I think a lot of people will be very disappointed just to hear me moaning about the life as a journalist, which is otherwise pretty sweet.
No, we won't do that. Sam Lee, it's been a pleasure chatting to you today. Thanks very much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks very much. Sorry it went on a bit, but you know, I did a massive Twitter thread yesterday, the maximum allowed by Twitter, so you probably knew what you were getting into.